are you today? I am super excited to talk to you today. If you don't know, I am writing a book and actually have a little announcement to make, which is that the book is officially official. I spent a year writing a book proposal. I've been negotiating with various publishers, and the ink is finally dry on the actual book deal. So I'm officially allowed to talk about it now. But I'm excited to announce that Taxes for Humans, my new book, is going to be coming out in September 2025, published by Wiley. So I'm super, super thrilled for that. And yeah, the fun part is I have already written half of the book. I've been writing this whole time. I didn't wait. I didn't wait for the contract. I was like, I'm doing this book, one way or the other. Which was a good psychological trick for myself and is also going to help me meet the very real, now contractually mandatory deadline. Um, but the reason that I bring up my book that I'm writing is that it is, gosh, writing a book is like the mental equivalent of like training for a marathon, maybe more. It's just, it's so intense. It's such a great exercise for your brain. And it's suddenly making me realize like all the authors that I've read before, hats off. Like it is such a big deal to write a book. There is so much to it. But one of the things that's happening as I'm writing my book is it's just, it's a wonderful intellectual exercise. It is forcing me to go through kind of all the statements I make all the time and fact check them and be sure. I mean, of course, I say what I already know is true. I'm not spouting off without doing my diligence. Um, but there really is something about like, well, who said that? Where did they say that? What was the context, right? Like a full fact check for everything is, it's just a level and degree of thoroughness that, yeah, that's serious. So I'm going through kind of all my content, um, all the things I've written and posted, the courses that I have produced, and I am sort of um, revising them and updating them and adding small adjustments, additions, things like that. And so over the course of the last few weeks, I have been giving you some bits that have come about in my research for the deductions chapter that I just finished. And last week we talked about travel deductions for your business. And this week, I want to give the coda that I promised to the travel deductions, which is about meals deductions. When you are working for yourself, when you're self-employed, you are allowed to deduct meals that you incur because of your business. And there's two different kinds of meals that are allowable as a deduction for you. So today I want to talk about what those two types of meals are, what the rules are, how to document them so that you can do it with the reassurance that you're doing it safely and correctly. And that if those meals are ever challenged, that you have exactly what you need for documentation to make sure that they uphold the, that they withstand the challenge and that you are still allowed to keep those meals deductions. Because let's face it, having meals with people for business it's one of the pleasures of business, truly. And it's a real and wonderful thing that we as humans build relationships with each other. And part of the way that business is really and truly done is through relationship building, and breaking bread with people is a huge part of that. So inviting somebody that you have an interest in collaborating with to share a meal with you and talk about your proposal for a new project, that's a wonderful and deductible meal. So let's get into it. First of all, the reason that this is a follow-up to the travel, business travel podcast that I did last week is because one of the types of meals that is deductible in your business is travel meals. Okay, so I wanted to make sure to pair these two episodes together. If you missed the travel deductions episode, it's last week's episode to just scroll back in your podcast player and you just click on last week. I will also include that in the show notes for you. So you have it there. Okay. All right. So first I want to talk about client meals, and then second, I will talk about travel meals. All right. So client meals. Business is done through meals, through having a drink, through getting a coffee all the time. This is common practice for almost any business. I'm trying to think of a business where that does not require relationship building. There may be some, but really, truly, the business generally has people on the outside that you need, right? As customers, as clients. So a client meal, I'm going to call it a client meal, but it's really a meal with a business contact. It doesn't have to be a client, right? A deductible meal could be you hired a couple of contractors to do a job for you, and you take them out for lunch as a thank you after the job is done, right? That's not a client, but it's absolutely a deductible business business purpose meal with a business contact. So that's fine. All right. So types of people, it really doesn't matter so long as it's a business purpose. So it can be someone you've hired as a contractor. It could be taking out an employee. It could be taking out a boss because you want some advice or feedback. Although you're probably not a freelancer if you have a boss who's not yourself. So, what else? It could be somebody that is a current client where you're trying to generate new business or just expand your relationship with them. It could be somebody who you hope to work with. The business doesn't have to happen for it to become a deductible meal. You have to just be trying to get the business, right? So those are all valid purposes for a business meal with someone. All right. And you can use your own imagination to come up with other examples or the ones that are the most relevant in your own life. But the really important thing is it does have to be with someone else. And I say this because I actually know quite a lot of people, and I used to do this myself. I didn't deduct it, but I did. If I would have a really long studio day, I would often take myself out for a nice lunch. Or actually, I do it now with Sunlight Tax quite a bit. If I have a really, really hard slog of a day, I might take myself out for a nice lunch to celebrate myself, as a little reward. That's fine. Go ahead and do it, but it's not tax deductible. You cannot, when you're at your tax home, you cannot take yourself out for a meal or a drink and deduct it. It's not okay. Now, if you're traveling, that's a different story because, of course, when you travel, it's a meal away from your home, and then that is deductible. So this is a big difference between a client meal or a business contact meal and a travel meal. Okay, but right now we're talking about the client meal. Okay, there's a really strict rule about receipts, about documentation when you are doing a travel meal, a meal with a business contact. The reason this extra strict requirement exists is because there's abuse in this category. And the IRS is well aware that a lot of people like to get very slap happy with their business credit card and just pull it out when they're having drinks with friends and try to deduct it. And that is just simply not allowed. So the receipt alone is not enough. I want to warn you. You have to fulfill a more strict requirement when you have a meal with a business contact. You need to keep the receipt, but you also need to document who you met with and what the business purpose was, okay? I want to warn you really strictly that if you had every single receipt for every single business meal you had with a business contact, but you did not have the names and the business purposes of those meals, they would all be disallowed by the IRS, okay? So they mean business. When they say that this is an extra stringent requirement, they mean it. So my recommendation for how to track this is, most people running any kind of business keep a calendar, right? So you can document this information in your calendar. You probably are already putting on your calendar that you're having lunch with, I'm going to use myself as an example. I am having a lunch with Rachel Meginnes this Friday. She is another artist who shows with me at the same gallery in Asheville. And she reached out to me and was like, hey, I'd just love to, chat with you about career stuff, right? So that's a business meal for both of us in our art practices. And it's on my calendar so that I remember to show up and where it is, right? So that's it's just a little bit of an extra step to say, who the artist is that I'm meeting with, and then what the purpose is. And it doesn't have to be an essay. It just has to say like, exchanging business contacts or career opportunities, right? That's enough for the purposes here. Of course, put in your own purpose. All right. So I recommend using your calendar. Ultimately, if you were in the position of being audited over this category and having to show the documentation, you would pull out the receipts for these meals and you would also match them up to the calendar. Okay, so that's enough. That's sufficient. If you prefer, you can write on the receipt when you receive the receipt for the meal. You could write directly on the receipt, lunch with Rachel Meginnes, to talk about, art world contacts and opportunities, right? I could do that. So you can do it either one of those two ways. Don't forget, if you did not already know, that a credit card statement is not sufficient. A credit card statement or a bank statement never counts as a receipt. That is not keeping a receipt. You need the actual receipt from the restaurant, from the bar, from the coffee shop, okay? So never, under any circumstances, is your credit card statement or bank statement sufficient as a receipt. So just be careful there and don't get that one confused. All right. For all meals, whether it is a travel meal or a meal with a client, meals are only allowable up to 50%. So obviously this is a place where your bookkeeping and your taxes are not going to match. And I just want to be here to say that's a normal thing. There's nothing wrong with you because those numbers don't match. And this is a good example of a place where they won't, and they won't, right? Because you have to pay for 100% of your meal. And then ultimately, when you put it on your tax return, only 1/2 of that amount is actually a deduction. And the IRS makes the rule that way because they say basically, whether you're doing business or not, you have to eat, right? And so, sure, we'll allow some portion of the meal to be deductible, in theory, the business portion of it, but not the personal portion where, you just have to eat because you're a human. So it's a little arbitrary that they put it at 50%. They could have picked a different percent, but there you go. So all meals, whether you're traveling or whether you're having a local meal with a business contact, they all are only deductible at 50%. Now, in practice, you want to report into your tax software or to your tax accountant. You want to report the full amount that you spent. And it is generally the job of the accountant or the software to cut the number in half. But I will warn you not to do that math in advance because they will cut it in half. So if you give them half, you'll only get a quarter deduction. So that's just a little practice tip for you. If you've ever had it in your head that entertainment is also deductible, I just want to tell you why that's there, but it's not actually true anymore. Before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2018, it used to be a category called meals and entertainment. It's not even worth talking about the entertainment part anymore because basically the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act eliminated entertainment from being a business deduction. So that is no longer. It's only meals now. Sometimes you'll see, if you're looking at old documents or old articles on the internet, you might see meals and entertainment listed as a category. And so I just want to clarify confusion. If you had any confusion about that entertainment is over. You can still, take a client to a baseball game or to the theater. That's fine, but you can't deduct it. If you go to dinner beforehand, sure, you can deduct that. But that's all. Okay. Now, let's talk about travel meals. Travel meals are a little bit different. Functionally, they have to be while you're on a business trip. And business travel is defined as when you are traveling sufficiently far away or for sufficiently long amount of time that it requires rest, typically overnight rest, right? So we're not talking about long enough where you might want to pull over on the highway and take a nap in your car. That's not enough rest. Usually what we're talking about here is that you need to sleep, right? You need to have an overnight sleep. it can be a crappy night's sleep. It can be 4 to 6 hours, but it's more along those lines. Okay. So when you are traveling, of course, you can travel for business alone. And so therefore there's a real difference where a travel meal when you're alone is okay. Whereas obviously a client meal, there's no client. So it's not a business meal. A local business meal cannot be alone. Now, there's two different ways that you can take the travel meal. You can either use what's called the actual expense method, which is just what it sounds like. You keep the receipt and you deduct, you add together all your travel meals from breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And you add them up. And of course, you'll be allowed only 50% of that cost ultimately on your taxes. Or alternatively, you can do a method called the standard meals allowance, sometimes referred to as the per diem. So what that is that it's an averaged rate set by the GSA for US-based travel and set by the State Department for international travel. And essentially, they just pick a value of an average meal in that location for an average US business traveler. Okay, so if you're traveling to an expensive city, if you're having a meal in San Francisco, you're probably at about the peak domestic rate for the per diem meals expense. And if you're traveling to, I don't know, rural northern Maine, perhaps it would be lower. Okay, so it's based on the actual costs in the area that you are. So for your documentation, when you're taking a per diem meals expense, what you want to document is the location that you traveled to and the number of days that you were there. Okay. The very cool thing about the per diem meals expense, the standard meals allowance, is that you simply use the lookup tool on the GSA website or the State Department website if it's international travel, and you use that rate as your allowable rate. You get to take an average rate. And for that reason, you don't need a receipt for the meals that you had, okay? Because you're taking an average, you're not taking your actual receipts, okay? It's a pretty good deal, especially if you are a person who doesn't drink a lot of alcohol, doesn't eat a lot of meat, doesn't eat just a lot, if you're vegetarian. I don't tend to eat a lot of meat or drink a lot of alcohol. And so my meals tend to be a little smaller than probably the average US business travel. I am not having a T-bone steak and 3 martinis. And so for me, the per diem standard meals allowance works out really well when I travel because I'm a little bit frugal. So it's one of those magical places in the tax code, of which there are not many, where you can actually get a bigger deduction than what you actually spent, right? Presuming that standard meals allowance is actually higher than the money you actually spent. So I find this typically to be true of people who are pretty frugal in their travel, okay? There's a little bit of extra math when you're taking the per diem standard meals allowance for travel meals. So just to give you kind of some extra detail on it, when you take the per diem meals, let's say I travel to New York City to do a speaking gig for Sunlight Tax, and I was there for 3 days. Now, the first and last day of travel are only deductible. You only get to take those meals expense at 3/4 value. Okay. So I add together I subtract 2 of the days out of the total of a 3-day trip. And 2 of those days, I'll take the New York City per diem standard meals allowance and I will multiply it by 0.75, okay, for 3/4. And then I will add in 1 day at the full rate, okay? So that's the math that I do in the background. In general, I'm telling you this, but your software should be able and capable of doing that math. Certainly, if you're working with an accountant, you should say, I was in New York on a business trip for 3 days. I was in Las Vegas for 7 days, whatever it is. You should give them the location and the number of days. And it's the accountant's job to do that math for your per diem meals allowance. Likewise, it's your software's job. So I don't want you to stress too hard about the details of doing the math. I am naming them in case you are doing it, and your software doesn't have that capability. Okay. But just so you know what the actual rule is. My other tip for you when you're taking the per diem standard meals allowance is when you are looking up the meals rates. And I'll link to both the GSA and the State Department per diem lookup tools. They're very Googleable, but I'll link to those in the show notes. I will warn you, you have to keep in mind that taxes are retroactive in this country, right? So when you're working on your tax return, you are not typically looking at the day that the GSA website wants to surface to you. It's showing you the current year. But when you're doing your taxes, you're finding the number from the prior year, right? So right now, as I'm recording in 2024. If you're doing your taxes, it's past the tax deadline right now, but if you're on extension doing this, you need to look up the 2023 rate because you're doing your 2023 taxes still between now and October 15th. We're still in the 2023 tax season. So don't forget to click the little year drop down on those lookup tools and make sure you're in the right year. Okay. You got to get that number right. All right. Okay. So I hope that has helped you understand how to deduct business travel meals or meals with a business contact. And just the last word on this is one of the delights to me about working in a field that you really, really love with people that you really enjoy is that this is a part of business that can really feel like a pleasure. And just the fact that you really, really enjoy who you work with does not mean it's not business, right? Of course, you are not going to go out and use your business card and deduct stuff you do with your friends that has no business purpose. Don't do that. But I don't know about you, a lot of the people who I collaborate with, do projects with, want to be around in the art world are people I genuinely enjoy. And so it's a delight to me to, for example, go have drinks with my gallerist, Tracey Morgan here in Asheville, because I love her and I consider her a friend, but she's also my gallerist. And so when I, go meet up with her for a meal, we're usually meeting up in order to talk about my next show or to talk about an organization that wants to buy my work, right? So it usually is a business purpose, even though I love it. So let me leave you with that joyful thought. And I hope that you feel inspired to build those relationships, get your network going, and remember that it can be a wonderful tax deduction for you. All right. I will see you on the next one, everybody. By the way, if you enjoyed this episode, if it was valuable, if this was helpful to you, please share it with a friend. It's so, so valuable to me, and it helps you and me and all of us stay off social media. Podcasts are not very discoverable by new people. And so when you share an episode because it really helped you, or you have a friend you know it's going to help, it means the world to me. It's so hard to grow a podcast, and your shares make a world of difference. So if you have a friend who you want to have a business meal with, maybe you send them this episode and then set up your date and purpose on the calendar and go have that drink together. All right. Love you all. I will talk to you on the next one. Bye. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, be sure to like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel. I'm so grateful for that. This video is for education and entertainment only. Nothing in this episode should be taken as individual tax or financial advice. You can find all the tools, books, and links I reference at sunlighttax.com/podcast.